California Congressman Ed Royce is with us this morning, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So governors are taking action across the country. What's your take on arming the National Guard in the wake of what we saw last week in Tennessee?
Yeah, I think the governors are going to arm the National Guard, and now the question is, can we in Congress make certain that, our Marines, when they're in a situation like this, have the ability to defend themselves? I think it's irrational that, overseas they've got the ability to protect themselves, but here in the homeland, when you know that these facilities are being targeted, that they do not. And so I think we will take up legislation to allow them to do so, certainly in the wake of the loss of these 4 Marines and 1 naval reservist. This has been a tragedy for the country. And is an example of the kind of attack we're under.
And of course, all of those 5 really wonderful servicemen were unarmed, were totally vulnerable. There weren't any soldiers or anyone outside who could have been armed to stop this person from entering the military sites. And we know that the Chattanooga gunman was blogging about Islam, showed increased signs of devotion. Are we doing enough to stop homegrown terrorists?
Well, here we have a situation also where he took a half-dozen trips to the Middle East, and at the same time, we're not doing enough against ISIS. There's no doubt about that. If the administration, if the president had allowed, as recommended, the attacks early on ISIS, the use of air power before they took these cities, before, as they were leaving Syria to take Fallujah and then take Mosul, if he would have allowed the military to hit the ISIS units when they were on the open road out in the desert, they could have taken them out or really damaged ISIS in the early months of that campaign. But the president set by as 14 separate cities fell to ISIS. And as a result, ISIS took an enormous amount of territory without us even being in the fight during the first year of that campaign to expand ISIS. And now they're recruiting all over the world, to the detriment and danger of citizens not just here but worldwide. So yes, we should have done more, and right now 3/4 of the flights that are sent out to hit ISIS targets come back without dropping their munitions because they've got to go through Washington, D.C. to get an okay to hit ISIS targets.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous the way this campaign is being carried out.
And, of course, this campaign included more airstrikes over the weekend. We're going to talk about that. A lot to get to with you, Congressman Royce. I also want to ask you about the Iran deal, given the president has just sent it to Congress today. We are once again with House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce. And Mr. Chairman, what about that? I mean, is there something else to do in terms of agencies, as Eric was just reporting, to further protect the American people from these lone wolf attacks?
Yes, I think Chairman Mike McCall with Homeland Security is pursuing the right approach there. But I'm going to go back to the point, Maria, I made with you earlier, and that is we have to see ISIS rolled back and defeated on the battlefield. There is no substitute for having them have egregious losses out there in their efforts to take Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Jordan. As you know, they have been, able with impunity to carry out a lot of their operations. And until the administration changes a position and young men around the world that are otherwise susceptible to recruitment to ISIS sees that ISIS is actually being defeated, sees that, history and God in their minds is not behind ISIS, that ISIS, in fact, is going to fail. Until they see that, they're going to be susceptible. And ISIS is going to have the capability to send those messages out. We need ISIS on the run rather than us on the sidelines. And to do that, it takes a change in strategy and tactics.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Meanwhile, you and Michael McCall wrote a letter to the president regarding the Iran deal. We know that this upcoming week, the UN Security Council is expected to vote on a resolution to endorse the Iran deal sometime in this upcoming week, and we know that the president has just sent the deal to Congress today. Can you explain to us how the next 30 days plays out?
And I wish somebody could explain to me in the administration, and I've talked to the deputy over there, Tony Blinken, and I've talked to Samantha Power, the ambassador to the United Nations, about this very issue. It seems to me that under the law, it is Congress that has the decision and the next and responsibility next 60 days to review this agreement and decide on lifting those sanctions, the $150 billion we're talking about, and decide upon whether or not we're even going to lift the arms embargo on Iran, which was thrown into this agreement at the last minute. And that includes their intercontinental ballistic missile system, where we're being asked by the Pentagon not to support that. If you'll recall the words of our Secretary of Defense last week and the words of our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who said that should be kept in place. So there's some big issues here that the administration is doing an end run around by going right now to the Security Council and saying the United Nations should lift this in advance of Congress with its responsibility of reviewing this document. It looks as though the administration is trying to have the United Nations act before Congress can act. I don't understand how that is proper, and that's why Mike McCall and I sent that letter to the President and why we're convening hearings next week on this subject.
So is that the end of the story? I mean, the President has said repeatedly any challenge to this deal will be vetoed. I mean, it's so extraordinary that in the 11th hour, the Iranians come out and say, okay, we'll do the deal. However, we want one more thing. We want that arms embargo lifted after 5 years. That's one thing. And at the same time, I don't know, was there any conversation about the 4 Americans currently being held as hostages in Iran? That obviously was not part of the deal. Those Americans are still there. And the President is vowing that this is the final deal.
The zeal for the deal here led to a situation where at the last minute, not only Iran, but Russia got what they wanted, and we got rolled at the end. And what Russia wanted was the ability to transfer that intercontinental ballistic missile capability over to Iran. And Iran wants it because, as you know, their Ayatollah is urging, as he said, every military man to figure out how to mass produce these ICBMs. We heard our Secretary of Defense say, and our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs explain, that the problem here is that the I in ICBM stands for intercontinental, as meaning could fly from Iran into the United States. And that is why, said Ash Carter, that is why, said our Secretary of Defense, we have got to prevent them from doing that. Right. You heard the same thing from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So when Dempsey and Carter are warning us, and then all of a sudden at the last minute that's put into the agreement, yes, Congress has real bipartisan concerns, and that's why we're beginning the process in my committee of looking at this next week, and so will the Senate. So, I mean, bottom line, very quickly, sir, if in fact Congress rejects this deal and then the President vetoes it, are you powerless? No, no. Well, I mean, what we have the capability of doing here is getting the details out in front of the American public so that we can override a veto. And this would not be the first time that a presidential veto was overridden. Okay. But what's important is for the people to understand the details, and that's the importance of the hearing and getting our expert witnesses up there, getting the inspectors up there to talk about the 24-hour inspections becoming instead 24-day inspections. No, we've got to have a thorough vetting here so that the American public understands the risk in terms of the course the president is on here. Understood. Congressman, thanks very much for weighing in. We appreciate it. Thank you, Maria. We'll see you soon. Congressman Ed Royce.